Welcome to the Jedi Ranger. I'm JohnBerry555, and today I'm continuing my series of Mash retro reviews with Season 4, Episode 23, The More I See You. And this episode actually provides some insightful backstory into Hawkeye. Kind of explains a little bit of his womanizing behavior that we see earlier in the season. We still see it a bit later on in the series, but is more portrayed more as dating around. Basically, when Hawkeye was in residency, he was seeing someone and was pretty serious. And she ends up returning in this episode because she happens to be transferred to the 477. And they were not serious, but not serious, because they were living together, but not technically married. Now, when this episode is set and when that would have occurred in historical timeline would have been a huge social taboo. But when the episode was made, not as much. And definitely they portrayed it in the episode more like how it would have been when the show was made. I.e., like, okay, people are doing that. Now, if Frank had been in this episode, you bet they probably would have Frank be totally judging Hawkeye for it. And then Hawkeye will probably talk about how Frank is, cheating on his wife. I'm just saying, that's probably how that would have gone. Don't know why they didn't saw Frank in there, except for either Larry Linville wasn't available for this episode, or they decided that for this episode, having that conflict between Hawkeye and Frank in some form would not have worked for the episode, and I think that is actually the right call. But yeah, so an old flame of Hawkeye's, they broke up, and as we learned throughout the episodes, because he was giving too much attention to his medical work and not enough attention to her, i.e. he couldn't commit to two things at the same time and was prioritizing one at the expense of the other. And then afterwards, she eventually found someone else and got married, and still kept on being nurse, but ended up at the 477, and all the feelings on both of their ends returns. And that actually leads to her starting an affair, or Hawkeye starting an affair with her. We can score it either way. The emotions come back, and let's just say this is probably the episode that I would say doesn't paint Hawkeye in the best light, because it portrays him as almost insecure in about stuff, and more of his snappier side to a person who a person who doesn't deserve it. When he's snappy with Frank, or with a officer who's throwing their men into the field of battle willy-nilly, Hawkeye's snappiness is portrayed as justified, but here it's portrayed as, I don't know if this is a good way of, I don't know if they necessarily portray it as wrong, but unfounded is probably a good way of phrasing in how they present it in the episode. And ultimately the nurse, her name is Carly, by the way, decides to request a transfer because she can't stay there with Hawkeye. And that is actually, in the way that it's presented in the episode, probably for the best. She can't work with Hawkeye and stay faithful in her marriage, even if she, with all the feelings coming back and starting to feel unsatisfied in her marriage, she still can't do that. Meanwhile, Hawkeye traps himself in the corner. Literally, he actually does that and when he's like, maybe I'll actually be able to commit this time. But, like, the way he's phrasing is like, he thinks he might be able to, but it's not a guarantee. And that contributes to the relationship, ending again. But this time, it's portrayed that it's ended much healthier, where they actually talk about why the relationship is not working, which didn't happen the first time, so allows maybe some growth. Is there any consequence of this growth in MASH? No. But it does allow for it, and if MASH was made nowadays, yeah. Well, minus the show like MASH wouldn't be made today because it will only get 10 episodes a season. It would be canceled after 2 seasons on streaming because it wouldn't made enough money or have a large enough audience. And then maybe it would have bounced to another streaming service, but probably not. I have whole thoughts on the current streaming ecosystem. But the point I just really wanted to convey there is, yeah, there's going to be no further consequences for this episode, but this episode does explain Hawkeye's behavior in the past, which makes it quite unique. This episode also introduces Colonel Potter's hobby of painting. He paints a picture of Radar and a picture of Klinger. And I do know we see the Klinger portrait several times in later episodes. I don't remember the Radar portrait. I'll try to point it out if I see it again, but I'll probably forget. That's more of a side tangent, a side note from the rest of the episode. But there's one last thing too. A conversation between Hawkeye and BJ And BJ states that he doesn't cheat on his wife Peg, not because cheating would get him sent to hell without an electric fan, not because cheating is wrong, but simply because he doesn't want to do it. And I think that also portrays a lot of difference between not just Hawkeye and BJ in terms of things like Hawkeye doesn't mind, that's affairs and that. But it also paints a contrast between BJ and Trapper who is notoriously unfaithful to his wife. Well, BJ is notoriously faithful. And in fact, there's actually a later episode where BJ is tempted and he feels notoriously guilty about it. We'll talk about that episode when we get to it. But the point is to show that contrast, not just with former MASH, but also with present MASH, how basically BJ takes his responsibilities in his marriage seriously, while Hawkeye does not take responsibility in his relationships. This is one of the first times where that even occurs with Hawkeye in his relationships. I remember an episode in, I think it was season 3, where there was a rumor that the war was over and they were all getting shipped home. Well, Hawkeye, because he was seeing multiple nurses, tells lies to all of them to get out of any long-term commitment with them once the war is over. And that kind of continues here. Like, he doesn't really want to. He can't properly commit to anything, and thus, for him, not committing is just a thing that he does. Just as with BJ, him not wanting to cheat is just something he wants to do. It's a contrast between the characters. Is there more we can discuss in this episode? Probably. In fact, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below, and I'll see you next week for episode 24. Thank you for watching my video. I do hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please be sure to give this video a like and share. Also, consider subscribing to my channel to stay up to date on all my latest content. In the meantime, thank you for watching, and as always, have a good day, a good night, wherever you are. May the force be with you, always.